everybody, and welcome to Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. My guest today on Attendance Bias is Jeff Sommar. Jeff chose to discuss the Fish Show from July 12th, 1996 at the Melkweg Theater in Amsterdam, Holland. Jeff reached out to me on the Fish.net forum, and he asked if he could come on Attendance Bias because he would love to talk about seeing Fish during his backpacking days in Europe. Once Jeff brought up Fish's Europe 96 tour, I felt compelled to hear about it because not only is this the earliest show brought up on the podcast so far, but it was in Amsterdam. Seeing a show when Fish had the reputation of being the stoner band, playing in one of the only cities where marijuana was easily accessible, I thought my listeners would love to hear what that was like, and I was personally interested as well. Jeff was excited to share the details explaining his first show in Syracuse in 1994, what it was like inside the small venue, and what led to this, how should I put this, musically uneven show. So get your backpack together, exchange your dollars for guilders, and let's go back and join Jeff Sommar to talk about July 12th, 1996 at the Melkweg in Amsterdam, Holland. Jeff, thanks for being on Attendance Bias. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So I'm very excited to talk about today's show in the Melkweg, Amsterdam. I think it's the Melkweg, on July 12th, 1996 in the Netherlands. I'm excited for a few reasons. Number one, this is the earliest show that a guest has picked so far on Attendance Bias. It's the only show outside of the country, and it's the only show from 1996, which I think is, if not an underappreciated year, certainly an underrepresented year when people talk about Fish. So I'm excited to dig in to hear about what it's like to see Fish in Europe, and especially in such a small venue.
Sure.
So to start at the beginning of it, why did you pick this show? Why do you have attendance bias toward this show?
I picked this show probably because it was one of the worst musical performances I've seen the band do. So it really stood out to me and is unique in that regard. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to attend many awesome and incredible Fish shows between New Year's Eves and Halloween and festivals, and I've seen Harpua and like you name it. I've been lucky enough to see plenty of those. So there's no shortage of amazing, transcendent Fish moments that I could talk about. But I kind of felt this would be a little bit more interesting to talk about a show that didn't do that, because for me, there's so few and far between where that happens.
I had similar thoughts when listening to it. And this is unique in that way, in that there's a lot going on in this show and it doesn't quite click. It's almost like playing Jenga, but you keep picking the wrong piece and then rebuilding again to try again. But the band kind of stumbles all over themselves. And we'll get to that in a little bit.
Even beyond that, though, even though if the show, upon re-listen, you can hear plenty of issues with it, that was still a time in my life that I have fond memories of, backpacking through Europe in 1996. So that was also part of the reason that I think I chose this show as well, to be able to really dive back into those memories and that time of my life as well. So that was cool.
Tell us a little about your background. I know you grew up in the Philly suburbs. What was your background like musically speaking as you grew up?
Definitely not jam band, definitely not the Grateful Dead. Like the Grateful Dead was not my entry point into Fish or the jam world. I'd say like I was, at that time period, classic rock, and then into like more alternative rock, trying to find my way musically, to see what I think I was intrigued by things that weren't necessarily in the mainstream as I got away from classic rock and started to dig a little deeper. If you remember the MTV show 120 Minutes.
Absolutely, with Matt Pinfield.
Yeah, that a lot of that stuff I was into. I wanted to find my niche that was a little bit off the beaten path. And some of it I still listen to this day. And some of it, was just sort of a flash in the pan. So that was my early music background, was that kind of stuff.
What were some of your first concerts then, or like deep musical experiences before you got into Phish?
Yeah, so I was kind of a late bloomer as far as going to concerts went. My first real concert was when I was a senior in high school, and that was U2 in Philly at the Spectrum. And it was it was an amazing time. I was big into U2 at that point. And they're showmen for sure. So it was a really good show. Didn't really see too many other shows beyond that. And then when I went to Syracuse universities, where I went to college in the fall of '92, I saw a couple shows on campus there, but wasn't really a huge concert going guy at that point.
So you were a senior in high school when you went to your first show at the Spectrum in Philly in '92. And then you said your first Phish show was in Syracuse. Is that right? When you were in college?
And in November of 1994 was the first Phish show. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about how Phish crept into your life and how you ended up going to see them in '94?
So, like I said before, I was not into the Dead. So, I was just not dialed into that world at all. But in the summer of 1994, I was at home in Philly. I was working a landscaping job. And there was a guy that I worked with, kind of a classic college age stoner guy. Jason was his name. Some of the more blue collar, regular full-time employees at the landscaping place called him Spacin' Jason. So Spacin' Jason would talk about this band named called Phish that did all this weird antics, like throwing balls into the crowd and then jamming along with the balls as they bounced around, or jumping on trampolines, just all this really zany stuff, which definitely intrigued me at the time, but I still hadn't really listened to any Phish at that point. But then it was back in Syracuse in the fall of '94 that Hoist had been out for a few months at that point, and I was hanging out with people that played that album a lot. And I think that is a pretty accessible Phish album to listen to if you don't really know the band. So I was really into it. Like pretty much all of the tracks resonated with me, and we listened to it a lot. So I got very familiar with it. I think also around that time, some people were playing some older stuff. This was all album stuff. Like I wasn't really listening to any shows yet. I remember Fee also being one of the early songs that I, identified as, oh, this is Phish, right? This is kind of a weird lyrics and a strange and funny song, kind of reinforced some of the stuff that Spacin' Jason had talked about. And I think a live one came out around then as well.
A live one came out in 1995, I believe.
Okay.
But yeah, around then. But I agree with you that Hoist is an extremely accessible album. And I think at that time, not only the band's career, but also in popular music as well, that's when college rock radio really embraced all different kinds of anything that could be considered alternative, like anything that could fit under that huge banner, under that umbrella name. And I think Phish, a song like Sample in a Jar, for example, would be like prime college rock radio.
Definitely. And going to a college, at Syracuse University, the Northeast of the United States, from 1992 to 1996, like that's pretty much the perfect time to get exposed to Phish. And then even for that first show in November of '94, it was a buddy who got the ticket. I said, "Hey, who wants to go?" And I said, "Okay, sure." Like I didn't have to do any work really. He just, handed me a ticket and said, "Let's walk down to the Onondaga War Memorial."
That time in the band's life when they were kind of on the upswing, they kind of had already made the jump, I think, from clubs to small theaters. And now they were starting to fill college basketball stadiums. Mm-hmm. I think like that was kind of where they were getting ready to jump to arenas, where by the end of '94, they were playing Madison Square Garden. And so to be, like, as you said, a college student in upstate New York, where there are so many colleges, whether you're talking about Buffalo or Oneonta or New Paltz or Syracuse or Albany, where every single one has an arena that is somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 people. The Onondaga War Memorial, where you saw your first show, is about 7,500. Is that right? Capacity?
Yeah, that sounds right.
What were your thoughts walking into this brand new environment?
Well, I was first and foremost, before we even got to the venue, just the action in the parking lot and the number of people that were there with their fingers in the air. Also, like, there were a ton of people there that wanted to get in that show that did not have a ticket. I guess I don't have anything else to compare it to, but it definitely struck me as like, wow, there's a lot of people here that want to get in. There was a very palpable buzz in the parking lot. We get inside the venue, and it's, your minor league hockey arena with the one bowl of seats, no upper deck. And then on the floor, they actually had rows of seats on the floor. It was not GA on the floor, but the assembled crowd that was on the floor started taking all of the seats and passing them like to the side of the floor, where then everybody was taking the seats and just stacking them up. So there was like stacks of 10 seats, like 100 deep along the side, because everyone just wanted to get rid of the chairs to create their own like de facto GA dance floor, which absolutely blew my mind that I was watching people do that. People that were not content to just accept the reality that was around them and accept like, oh, I'm in row 8, seat A. They were like, nah, let's get these seats out of here because we just want the dancing room. So,
right. And not only not accepting it, but taking the action to change it.
They had the gumption.
How dare they?
To just move these seats out of I don't care what my ticket says. This is what we want to do. This is how we want to experience this show. This is how we want to have a good time. I was hooked on that instantly, like the facet of the crowd participation, like people just not being passive spectators, but kind of active participants that were cultivating their experience and fine-tuning it to make it the best that it could be. I fell in love with that instantly.
Yeah, it fits right into the whole fish ethos. If you can't find what you want in the world around you, you make it. You make it happen. And sometimes it's something you didn't know you wanted until it actually happens in front of you. And that, from who knows, from 94, before that, all the way up to the Baker's Dozen, or to their New Year's gags. It's like things just materialize and they blow your mind, even though you never could have thought of it 10 minutes before it happens.
I was just still very, very wowed at how the crowd, everybody was just locked in to what was going on stage. And that energy between band and fans and the awesome light show that Kuroda was doing, even though I didn't know who he was at the time.
Right.
But 3 or 4 songs in, I'm having a great time dancing with my buddies. And then the band went into a Vibration of Life, which I don't know if you've listened to any of those.
Oh, sure.
Are you familiar? Yeah.
It doesn't always translate on tape. I'm a big fan of Trey Banter.
Sure.
So I love the Vibration of Life. And I think it was Halloween 95. I could be wrong on this, but there's also the Vibration of Death.
No, that was 94.
94. Okay.
That was just like 5 days before this show of November 4th.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was going on during the Vibration of Life?
So, Trey, and if your listeners haven't heard one before, it's a little hard to describe it as music per se. Right. It really is just vibrations like coming from the stage, noise coming from the stage. And, there's Trey Banter that goes, or narration that goes along with it, where he's talking about they're playing this vibration that is 7 beats per second. And that's the frequency that can be heard all throughout the universe. This vibration is the glue that holds the universe together. And we're going to play this right now to get you, the audience, like all charged up and get you in tune with the universe, which all sounds great, right?
It's very Trey. It's very Trey.
Yeah. Charge me up.
Yeah.
But as the vibrations continued, they just did not agree with my body in some way. I felt it like in my chest, and then like a little bit lower in my stomach, and like I had to sit down. Like the vibrations did not agree with my body at all. And they just kept it up. And now Trey's like, okay, now we're going to do it with the green light now. Give me the green light. And the crowd's going crazy and loving it.
Can you feel it? Okay, so the red with the vibration of life can heal the sick, can bring joy to the sad. Now what we've realized, and even more powerful that, is when you combine the green light with the vibration of life, you actually can send yourself to Gamehenge. Rising up in the distance, the trees in the distance, the forest, the green field, a large black rhombus floating in the middle of the stream, in the field. I can feel it. We can all feel it. You can see over on the mountain the tiny figure of Colonel Foreman climbing up the mountain. But something is wrong in Gamehenge. Something is wrong. The power of the vibration of life tells us that there's something slightly off kilter.
But as these vibrations continued, they unsettled me so much. And I truly felt this in my core, that it was vibrating me in a bad way, and it caused me to throw up.
Oh, God. Oh, God. You were that guy that night.
I was that guy for that moment.
Yeah.
That moment. My buddy who was next to me, like, went to get me a Sprite, and when I drank the soda and nursed myself back to health a little bit. And once they went back into, Fly Famous Mockingbird, into like sort of like the more regular music, any like sickness or bad feeling I had was gone. And I was like right back in it and having a grand old time. So I do believe it was something specific about just the vibration, whatever it was, that frequency just, rattled me to my core. And I've never met any of the members of Phish, but if I ever do, I've definitely got that story ready to go. Like, hey, the first time I saw you guys, your music made me vomit.
Looking into today's show, July 12th, 1996, Phish was in the middle of a European tour. I could be wrong about this, but when you think of Phish in Europe, my mind immediately goes to 97, to the winter, like February to early March 97 tour, where Slip, Stitch, and Pass is taken from that. There's the famous show in Italy where during the sound check, there was a limbo contest and all these stories. But I think a lot of fans, myself included, forget that the band did a short summer tour in Europe in 1996 in the summer that it's just not as well publicized, I guess I could say.
And I think probably part of that is due to the fact that a lot of the shows on that tour were one set shows where they were opening for Santana, but they did play 5 or 6 just Phish on their own standard 2-set shows. But yeah, I think the combo of like opening act for half the tours like makes people consider it less for whatever reason.
So to look at this tour, Phish played 18 shows in July 96 throughout Europe. They began in Italy, as you mentioned, as an opening act for Santana, and they crisscrossed mostly around Western Europe. They went from Italy to France to England and Belgium, back to Italy, and then back to France, and then ending up in Germany. And so it doesn't seem like a usual tour, geographically speaking.
Right.
According to Phish.com, they had just finished recording Billy Breathes that spring, and they went to Europe in hopes of jumpstarting some name recognition for themselves for international record sales. And I think Elektra was probably egging them on. And they had, like you said, some festival dates, today's show in Amsterdam, which was very oddly 2.5 sets, some opening shows, and then they resumed the tour in August when they came back to the U.S., ending it all with the Clifford Ball.
Judging by the people that attended these European shows that I were at, it was like 90% American, ranging from 90% to 100% American. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how successful the idea that they're going to attract European fans worked out, really.
And I remember reading stories and hearing stories from that 97 tour that it was extremely casual, that the band would be hanging out outside the venue, or it wouldn't be difficult. Yep. That's what I wanted to ask. Was it similar in that way? Was it casual and approachable?
Definitely very casual. I think the only time I actually saw them outside the venue and didn't tell them my vomit story, I didn't approach them really at all, was in Nuremberg, Germany. That was the only time that I saw them hanging out. But yeah, I mean, when it's only like 1,000 to 1,500 people, or even less, that Nuremberg show was probably like 500 people. It's easy to have the band and their crew just commingle with the fans that are there.
And what were you doing in Europe at this time anyway, in the summer of 1996?
So I had graduated college, Syracuse, in May of 96. And I had scored a job working at Wimbledon in London for HBO Sports. I don't know if you remember HBO Sports way back when.
I remember, with Brian Gumbel.
Wimbledon, yep. So, I had, studied TV and film production. So this was like, hey, I got my first job right out of college, working at Wimbledon. So I had planned to be in London even before the Fish shows in Europe were announced. So that it was just very fortuitous that I was like, I'm going to be there. I'm going to work for 2.5 weeks. I'm going to get paid like $100 a day, like $1,800 at the end of the tournament. And then 3 days later, Fish is going to play in London. And then the day after that in Amsterdam. So it was incredibly lucky timing for me that I was able to do my work, get paid, and then take a backpacking trip around Europe that was, interspersed with 4 Fish shows for me that summer. I didn't do the whole tour because I wanted to do some non-Fish traveling as well, but it kind of bookended like a good 2-week stretch for me.
So you're outside the Melkweg for today's show. What is the scene like? Because when I think Amsterdam, and it might be different for people who are a bit younger than you and I, but back in 1996, weed was still tremendously taboo in America. It was a big deal to go to Amsterdam or to hear from your friends, especially college students. I know you said you graduated a year or two earlier from college, but when I was in college, Amsterdam was like the place to check out because, man, you could smoke weed there. It was a huge deal. And now in America, I don't have the statistics, but in most states, there's some form of legal weed, whether it's medicinal or recreational. But back then, that was not the case. This was very exotic. So what was it like to be there at that time? Fish is the prototypical stoner band, after the Grateful Dead, but for our generation. So what was it like to be in the middle of that confluence of the stoner band with a place where you're allowed to get stoned?
Yeah, I think that definitely contributed to the hype, the pre-show hype for this show, which was just off the charts. You had a lot of things coming into play. There's the fact that, Fish in 96 was so ascendant, and all of the shows they were playing just kept getting better and better. You had everybody who realized that, we can see them in this tiny venue, and we're seeing them in Amsterdam where, yes, you can walk into a coffee shop and order a nug or order a spliff and then just light it up right there in the coffee shop. And it's, on the one hand, very civilized, if you will, but also as a college student, you just you can't believe that you can do this. You're just giddy with the fact that you just walked into this place, threw down some money, and bought a joint, and now you're smoking it. So there's definitely a giddiness to being there as well. So I would say that people are excited to go to Amsterdam for that reason. People were excited to see Fish at that time. So people going to Amsterdam to see Fish are doubly excited. It's just all feeding onto each other. So, and then also I think there's kind of the spirit of travel, the spirit of especially backpack travel, where everything that you have with you is literally in your backpack. And, if you're in Europe for 6 weeks or whatever, you don't really make up too great of an itinerary. You just kind of go where you want to go. And if you want to stay in Paris for another 2 days, you do it. And if you want to go to Switzerland, then you just go to Switzerland and find a hostel there. It's very impromptu. You got nothing tying you down. You don't really know where you're going to end up. It mirrors the Phish ethos and the way that they play. So I think that people that were predisposed to travel are into Phish and into just going to Amsterdam without a ticket also, because why wouldn't you? What's the worst thing that can happen if you go to this concert that you don't have a ticket for and you don't get one? Oh, I'm just in Amsterdam now.
So to get into the show itself, they kick it off with Wilson, and the recording, it immediately sounds like a small venue. It's very different from other shows in that time period, at least American shows.
Pick any of these Europe shows, because you're in such a small venue, they all sound amazing.
It sounds a lot like, and I thought this during Divided Sky, the next song, it makes me think while listening on my couch 24 years later, that it almost felt like I was listening to a tape from 1992, in that it was a very soft and smooth sound. It's not as expansive as what we're used to now. And people in the audience, according to the tapes, were very quiet and respectful. It sounds like tapes of early shows. Yeah. And I think during Divided Sky, I may have even heard a few shushers, which I hadn't heard in tapes in years. It's certainly not from 1996 when they're playing the Spectrum.
Yes, I think that the band playing in these club-sized rooms, they were definitely playing with sound dynamics a lot, and they didn't need to be arena loud all the time. They were able to dial it down, get quiet with it, and just play with those dynamics. And I think for the most part, people understood what they were doing. And if you were going to be the guy who kept yelling, woohoo or whatever during the quiet points, you were going to be annoying to everybody around you. And, that is something that's nice about the Phish going crowd, is that they are, a sophisticated concert going crowd. And you don't need to yell woohoo every time it gets quiet. Just listen to the band, listen to what they're doing. Oh, they're getting quiet now. Okay. Let's just enjoy it.
It is like an old school feel in terms of being quiet and respectful. And you can even hear it in the first couple of songs that go with Wilson, Divided Sky, and Horn. This could have been a show from 1991. And then to follow it up with Split Open and Melt.
Yep. Kind of an old school set list, definitely.
What started, I think, during Split Open and Melt became a theme throughout the rest of the show, in that it gets really heavy for about 20 seconds. This is about 5 minutes in, and a melody starts to develop. It gets pretty heavy, and then it gets a little schizophrenic, that it has 7 or 8 different jam beginnings, and none really develop. It does get fun and funky in the last 2, where Page takes the lead for about 10 seconds, and then they hit the coda almost by accident. It seems like They're starting to try a lot of different beginnings, but nothing really takes off. And that, I think, became a theme throughout this whole show.
Definitely. You start to see the beginnings of them, trying to push a jam, trying to push a song, out of the box. They kind of had a hard time hooking up on deciding on which direction they wanted to go. Yeah, you could definitely some foreshadowing of what was to come.
And it was really happening during Yamar, the next song, where it sounds totally normal, perfectly passable Yamar, with a really soft solo. I wrote that it was beautiful that they're playing low and delicate, back to your point about how in a smaller room they could play to those dynamics. And then it was weird toward the end, they almost like bail on it. They almost just let the song go away. I had a thought of almost a tease of big black furry creatures from Mars in Yamar.
Totally.
If you could picture that, right? I think Fishman just kind of tries to keep a steady beat on the hi-hat, but the band is like having none of it. And they just kind of abruptly turn into Funky Bitch. I think that's really a turning point in the set, this Yamar toward the end.
Yeah, agreed. And it, I think at this point we should just take a minute to talk about the quality of the weed.
Yes, please.
In Amsterdam. And I think for a lot of your maybe younger listeners, and you sort of touched upon this before, that like in 1996, marijuana was not ubiquitous in America.
Right.
There's no medicinal available, no readily available, even legal weed. That was just like the furthest thing away from everyone's,
It's Schedule 1.
Like, will it ever become legal? We would talk about, oh, no way. So the quality of weed that you could get in the States at that point was not great.
Right, like, stems and seeds.
Totally picking seeds out all the time. Occasionally, maybe you get the hookup and somebody would have the kind bud. They bring the KB into
which
town.
You'd pay for, by the way.
You'd definitely pay for it, but it's also like, one or two bong hits and, it would destroy you. So you could tell that the difference was there. But that was like few and far between. It was like the quality generally was not good. Now you're in Amsterdam, where it is quasi-legal, and they do care about cultivation, and they are taking different strains and crossbreeding them and trying to get higher THC concentrations. Like, that's all happening there. So any of the weed that you're getting is in Amsterdam is probably much better than what you are used to having. And you can just walk into a shop and buy as much as you want of it. So take those two things together, and people were overindulging, the band, the audience, everybody. So I think that you can see sort of the stoned mind of the band kind of manifest itself in the jams that never really went anywhere. It's just like very ADD, and like, your mind's just going so fast that you start your one thought here, but by the time you need to finish it over here, you get sidetracked along the way.
Yeah, it's like those late night college conversations you have when you're stoned and you say a million things that amounts to nothing. And exactly. And Trey kind of has ADD to begin with. While he's playing, he has a scramble of 100 ideas. And in this time period, especially, they came to fruition more than not. But this night, they did not.
No, they did not.
So I can imagine we've all had our freakouts at shows, but I guess by what you're saying, this was almost like a collective freakout.
Yeah, I think, probably amongst all members of the band, it's like when you are really, really high, I know for me, it's like, your short-term memory goes down to nothing. So it's like, you don't even remember what somebody said like 2 sentences ago. So I can't imagine trying to, like, in a band of 4 people, to try and just go out on a limb and, let's just go on to the next song that we don't know what it's going to be, but we'll figure it out on the way. Like, that's a recipe for disaster.
The next song was Funky Bitch, which is a really easy, like, let's get our groundings, let's get our feet on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great choice. It's really rocking. There's this theme that keeps going with the barely audible volume. There's a part right in the center of this song where it's barely audible. I had to turn up the volume I was listening on my computer with headphones, and I still could barely hear it right in the middle. They get so quiet. Was it like that in the venue? Like, did everyone shush? Did everyone have to be quiet to hear?
I don't recall any shushing at that point. I think it was like, at least in that moment, the audience was following along with what the band had going on. And I think everybody understood, like, oh, we're going to get really quiet right now. Okay, yeah, let's just let them do that.
Was it quiet and focused or quiet and zoned out? Because I think I know the answer.
It's probably a little bit of both. I mean, we're still in the first set here. So
right.
Maybe people had only had 8 or 9 joints throughout the day.
Oh, taking it easy.
Yeah. Probably still on the focus side, because we're still in the middle of the first set and you are still seeing Phish in Amsterdam. So I think, just that excitement and that adrenaline was probably enough to counteract the fact that everyone was just too damn high.
Yeah. Yeah. And the next song was Taste, and Trey introduces it as this used to be Fog That Surrounds. And so they were clearly tinkering with this since, I think, 95. And it's clear, even while they're playing, that they're not quite done. Like, this is still, it has a little bit more time to go in the oven.
Yep.
And after that, straight to Theme from the Bottom. So they're kind of caught in a 1995 time loop for a couple songs. Very straightforward, like the album version. And then for me, the big peak comes with Tweezer. The jam starts at about 5 minutes. It peaks, it builds, and then it slows down almost to reggae at the very end for the last 2 minutes. Do you remember anything about this Tweezer or the feel in the room?
I did listen to the show again, ahead of this, but I don't know if I specifically recall anything from the room.
Because this seemed the most coherent of the first. When I say coherent, I mean, I guess what we're used to when it comes to Phish. Right. The song and then a jam that builds and then kind of a come down toward the end. This felt more familiar to me and exciting than the other songs.
And maybe that's why I have less of a memory of it, just because it felt normal.
But strangely, after that reggae, or, I use that term loosely at the end of Tweezer, Fishman still plays the slow Tweezer beat, and Trey comes in with Llama, which is a cool transition, but it's also uneven.
Yes, definitely uneven. Just is that another example of just an idea that came out of nowhere, that sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And maybe this was a little uneven, but okay, now they're playing Llama, so we're just accepting it, and here we go.
And it was a good Llama. It's very short, but it's really on point. And I love this song, of course.
Yeah, it was good. It was a good finish to the set. Concise. They didn't have a chance to go too far and stumble.
And after the song, Trey says, we're going out, or we're going back for a 15-minute break, but we're just getting warmed up, which he used to say a lot back then. And of course, 15 minutes were never 15 minutes. But he also mentioned before Taste, a couple songs earlier, that they don't have a curfew that night. Yep. So when he says we're going back for 15 minutes, I think it was a wink and a nod. He says we're just getting warmed up. I think there was a lot to expect after that. Did you guys get that vibe, or what are your thoughts at set break?
I will say that as they walked off the stage, someone passed a joint up to Trey from the audience, which, he happily reached down and drag off of. And then that first set break was a long set break. I don't remember the minutes, but, and they're never 15, of course, but it was a long time where I think they were probably enjoying themselves quite a bit backstage.
So after an extremely long set break, they open set 2 with It's Ice. And it's almost like Trey's playing the intro riff, and then Page sort of joins in, and Fishman is playing at like volume 1, while the other guys in the band are playing at volume 7.
Yeah, I don't know what was going on there. It was just like that was their transition from the really long set break. Like, okay, now we're extremely high and we have to go play music.
It reminded me of when I would play music with my friends, and we would, like, 3 out of 4 people would know the song. And the 4th person didn't.
Right.
And they were just trying to fake their way through it. And there's times in the middle of this It's Ice where you could almost follow if you listen carefully. Page is pretty much on point, and Trey almost sounds like he doesn't know what part of the song they're in. And so he's just following Page, but as a result, he's always a half second behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was I guess in retrospect, the perfect start to set 2, in that it was just slightly off and a little confusing.
And then they segue into Prince Caspian, which I'm wondering in retrospect if it was kind of a grounding, like pull lever in case of emergency, because the song's only 2 chords.
Right.
And there's still times where they don't know which part is next. You could hear some band members sing the beginning of a next line that doesn't really go there, and then stopping themselves. So at this point, was it like completely like in the movie Half Baked, where everyone's kind of floating about 18 inches above the ground?
Yeah, there is one point during Caspian towards, like maybe like the 4 or 5 minute mark where, it gets really quiet. And again, nobody in the crowd is making any noise or shouting out. I think this time it had less to do with the sophistication of the crowd and not wanting to ruin the moment, and more about everyone was just didn't have the brain capacity to verbalize a thought.
To move on, they're playing on Mike's song next after Prince Caspian. It's like sudden and unexpected because Caspian was so mellow and, like you just mentioned, kind of quiet back and forth. And Mike's has a really good jam, like real intensity at about 5 minutes. Page takes over a little bit later, and then like a strange, almost like like a bee sting, everyone just kind of drops out. And Page, it's like they've hung him out to dry. He's out by himself, and the rest of the band morphs into Antelope, which has like an extremely coy beginning where it's like we're teasing, but we're not playing it, but we are. And Fishman's going to be on the woodblocks, but we don't know when we're coming in. And that sounded very strange to me.
Yeah. I would say the word morph is putting it nicely. It was not a smooth transition there. That was another one that just kind of, if you look at it on a set list, you're like, wow, I wonder how that sounded.
Mike's into Antelope on paper. That's something to pay attention to.
It was definitely rocky. The
Antelope itself, it felt like a continuation of Mike's song. So it was like, well, why not just stick with Mike's? But I guess, like you said earlier, they kind of had this ADD vibe going on tonight because it gets frenetic, or just when we're supposed to get frenetic, they just go mellow and Antelope is over now.
Yeah, that might have been the oddest call or point of the night. And maybe it's too generous to say it was a call. It just kind of
right.
As the Antelope Jam is roaring towards the peak that we expect, when it's supposed to get as frenetic and crazy as possible, they just all of a sudden go mellow and leave Antelope behind. It was very, very odd to do that. And, I'm not just, they don't need to finish every song every time, but that time it was a bit of a head scratcher.
It reminds me of what happened during the first set during Split Open and Melt, where it's like, all right, now we're ready to go. And then, no, we're not. And then again, and no, we're not.
Yep.
They move into Hold Your Head Up in Purple Rain. And my first thought was like, I wonder what got into them, because of course they're high as hell at this point, but it's like it came out of nowhere, at least on the recording it did.
Fish's performance of it was totally fine and funny and everything that you would have wanted from Fish in that moment. But it took everyone like a minute to get over the musical blue balls that everybody had from the bailing on that jam. But once you got over that and you're just accepting like, okay, Fishman's singing Purple Rain, like this is hilarious. Like,
it sounded fun.
Yeah, definitely.
So after Purple Rain though, things got really weird. Right? I could describe it by what I heard, but you were there. Tell us what happened after Purple Rain was over.
So, let's see. Trey just like, what he did, he asked the crowd, because it's such a small room, right? There's the conversation between the band and the stage and the audience is much easier. So Trey says, "Oh, we're going to make a song. Somebody call me out a chord." So people just started yelling out chords. I don't know which one they settled on. But then he said, "Give me a groove. Somebody give me a groove now." So somebody yelled out ska groove. So they just started like playing this kind of ska groove that they did for about a minute or so. And I think everybody appreciated the interactive nature of it. And we're helping Fish write a new tune here. So everybody appreciated it and it was fun in the moment, but musically, it wasn't really that great. And I think Trey realized that. And, I don't know if NICU was on the sheet and they were ready to go to that next, or the ska groove just felt like that. And they, went from the ska groove into NICU, very sloppily, I will add.
Right. And it doesn't make sense.
It made sense, but it was not executed well at all.
Yeah. Trey forgets the words like immediately. And then another transition sound like it falls apart before it comes together.
Yeah. The end of NICU also, I think, was like the last 3 minutes were really the most disjointed of the show. Like they seemed to really not be listening to each other or unable to listen to each other. Felt like everybody was, for about 3 minutes, it felt like everybody was playing something different and they just could not connect on any idea really. Until they eventually dropped into Slave. And normally at that point, kind of late in the second set, you'd be like, all right, yes, Slave. But in that moment, it was just more like, oh, okay, you're going to play Slave now. Okay, cool.
Imagine this show were played today. What can you imagine the response being like?
Yeah, well, knowing that Trey is, sober now, it would
True.
Everybody would be very concerned that, Trey fell off a little bit there. But yeah, people would be lampooning it for sure. Like, what the hell is going on here?
What was the reaction then after such a silly show?
Yeah, I think that the audience members were all just too high ourselves to really be overly critical. We were just at that point just kind of taking it.
Yeah.
Whatever the band was putting out, we were taking it. We were all still very excited to be at a Phish show in Amsterdam. But I don't think that there was, tremendous transcendent feelings of like this music is, lifting me and taking me to higher places. Definitely not that feeling.
Yeah, certainly not this Slave either. It's very limp.
Playing in quicksand is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Just really, really slow. And then once again, as they're, approaching what should be the triumphant peak of this late set 2 Slave, it just kind of fizzles also. They don't finish the song. Like, how do you not finish Slave at that point in the show? It just kind of like fizzles out into Page playing some piano notes that eventually gets drowned out by the crowd cheering. And then Trey starts making these noises with his guitar, probably because he thought it sounded cool. Like it was the first time he'd ever gotten high before. Like, whoa, listen to my guitar. Whoa.
And to wrap it up, they play Susie Greenberg, where I couldn't believe, because this is like Prince Caspian in the sense that it's, I think, 3 chords. Susie Greenberg is basically with just stops for Page to solo, basically. And they kept forgetting where in the song they were.
Yeah. The Page jams are hot for sure, but it's definitely undercut by, the sense that the band doesn't know what section of the song they're in. I guess because at that point they're like, oh, we'll take another break and come out for a set 3.
Yeah. What was that about?
I feel like it's probably the most unnecessary set in Phish history.
What do you mean by that?
Like, they were trying so many ideas and nothing seemed to be working, and like they weren't really playing that well. And I mean, I know that whatever, they're showmen and they want to just keep playing and they're having fun with what they're doing. But just listening to the quality of what had transpired in that set 2, I don't think we needed more of that.
The only time, aside from maybe Coventry, that a Phish fan would say that. And I don't mean to compare it. Like, Coventry and the second half of the 2004 summer tour was a whole different kind of sloppy than this. This is fun.
Absolutely. And we're talking about being too high from smoking or, eating too much marijuana. And it's funny. And it doesn't signal any like bigger, drug or, substance abuse problems.
Yeah, and I think that's something, as you and I are kind of going over and goofing on these songs, it's important to note that it's not the same kind of sloppy as a lot of us experienced toward the end of 2.0, where it was concerning. This isn't. Right. This is just the night where you smoke too much weed.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So for that third set, or the kind of half a set, because I think the whole thing is about 35 minutes or 40 minutes,
it's 3 songs. Yeah.
3 songs, right. So those 3 songs are Bowie, Free, and Hello My Baby to close this weird set, and with an encore of Bathtub Gin and Johnny Be Good. Of all these, Bowie was standard, although there is a pretty good part at the end, about 12 minutes in, that's got a lot of potential.
But again, when we should be charging towards the finish of that song, they just coast to a stop and start up Free. Like, they don't finish the song, and now they're playing Free, and in a kind of sloppy way also.
And then they played Hello My Baby to kind of close this weird set-ish thing, and I could barely hear it on the recording. What did they do throughout? Because I know you went to a bunch of shows in Europe. Did they sing this a cappella? Well, Hello My Baby's a cappella, but without mics?
Without mics. They came to the front of the stage, the four of them, and just sang it in the room. And they had done that the previous night in London as well. And none of the other two shows that I saw that year, or the two shows in 97, or the 397 Europe shows I saw. So I don't know if they did it at any other shows, but I think they felt like this room is small enough that we don't, and there's four of us singing, we don't need microphones.
And so they go off and come back for the encore, which we have as Bathtub Gin and Johnny Be Good. And Bathtub Gin sounds, to start, to me at least, a little sluggish. And I usually like chaotic, sloppy Fish, which, if there's a method to its madness, like in 94 and 95, like the Halloween 95 third set, You Enjoy Myself, that goes everywhere, all over the place. And it doesn't sound cohesive, but each part has its purpose. I feel like this isn't that.
Agreed. It's not cohesive, and it just kind of stays that way.
And to wrap it up all together, they kind of go back to their ultimate basics, like the number one rock song of all time, Johnny Be Good, which is like old reliable.
Straight ahead rocker, no jamming to speak of, so they can't get bogged down in thinking, where are we going next? It's just, straight ahead rocker to end the show.
So I know this was 24 years ago, Jeff, but do you remember anything about walking out of the venue? Like what the post-show scene or vibe was like?
Not particularly. I mean, at that point, we were in London the night before to see the show at Shepherd's Bush Empire. After the show, we stayed up all night to get our 6 a.m. flight from London to Amsterdam, land in Amsterdam at 8:30, go to the hostel to drop our stuff off, and immediately go to the coffee shops. Amsterdam show that ends at, I don't know what time it was, 2 in the morning, after smoking 10 joints or 15 joints or who knows how many all day. So I think I was pretty well fried by the end of it. So I certainly didn't walk out of the show, or I don't recall walking out of the show thinking, wow, they really played poorly tonight. I think I probably said, wow, this was quite an experience,
Yeah, fair enough.
I don't think anybody walked out of that show feeling unhappy. I think people probably took away, more than anything, like, this was a cool experience to see Fish in Amsterdam.
Yeah, and fun times that will always be fun, right? The definition of nostalgia, and in this case, attendance bias.
Absolutely.
So even though neither Jeff nor I were high on that primo Amsterdam weed for this interview, we still did make a few errors and left out a couple of details, so let's correct that now with the attendance bias fact check. The Onondaga War Memorial Fish Show that was Jeff's first was on November 4th, 1994, right after the band's Halloween White Album show. The vibration of life that made Jeff puke was in between a Forbin's Mockingbird transition in the first set, but I'm glad that Sprite was able to help him bounce back, because the second set included a version of The Curtain, Mike Song, Tila, Weekapog, and a Slave set closer. Quite a show. Jeff also mentioned that his first concert was U2 at the Philadelphia Spectrum in 1992. That show was on March 10th, 92, during the band's legendary Achtung Baby tour. The Pixies opened that show, and most of the band's nearly 2-hour set is available on YouTube, so that video is in today's show notes. When talking about Amsterdam, I mentioned that marijuana use, in the US at least in 1996, was still very taboo. As of this recording, there are only 2 states in the Union, Nebraska and Idaho, where marijuana is still prohibited for any use, medical or otherwise. We've come a really long way in 25 years. And when Trey reintroduces taste during this show in Amsterdam, he introduces it as what used to be Fog That Surrounds. They're still putting the finishing touches on the song, but it was tinkered with quite a bit since its debut in the summer of 95. Very briefly, Taste and The Fog That Surrounds were 2 separate songs throughout that calendar year, and each was moved around, switched, combined, rearranged, with the name always being a source of debate. However, on this Winter 96 European tour, the band settled on the final version of Taste that we know today, just a couple days before this show in Italy. And that's it for today's episode of Attendance Bias with Jeff Sommar. Thank you to Jeff, thank you to Fish.net, thank you to Fish.in for providing everything we needed for today. And of course, thank you to you all out there for listening. To support Attendance Bias, please leave a review and a rating on any podcast app that you enjoy, and just spread the word, tell at least one person about the show. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you as always for listening to Attendance Bias.